Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, really it's a pleasure to welcome you to our event, Trading Goods in the Digital Era, Experience from the Private Sector. And I'd like to thank you, all of you who have joined us actually in the room and online. My name is Suja Rishikesh Mavroidis, and I'm Director of the Market Access Division at the WTO. I would like to say that this event was organized jointly by the division, along with the International Chamber of Commerce. And I'd really like to thank our ICC colleagues for what has been a close and very productive collaboration. We have today with us Valerie Picard to my left. And Valerie is the head of trade at the ICC. We will also have Andrew Wilson, ICC Global Policy Director, and Florence Diagea, ICC Global Policy Lead, joining us online. But I would first like to start by giving Valerie the floor just to make a few introductory remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And given how there is very limited time, I'm just going to say very briefly how, on behalf of ICC, we're very excited about today's session. Really looking forward to it. I want to say a big thank you to the WTO, to the Market Access Division, and of course to all our speakers and the participants who are here today. And without much further ado, I will pass it back so that we can get on and get to the meat of to the substance of the session. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Valerie. And before we get into what is most certainly going to be an interesting discussion with our speakers, I would like to just take a moment to just mention a few housekeeping things. Firstly, we will be taking questions from the audience, and it will be more sort of an interactive mode. So we will take questions as they do come up. And in this regard, please do post your questions to the Q&A box window. There will be a dedicated space at the end of the session where we will just concentrate on questions from the audience, but it will be a really sort of flexible kind of mode that we will be functioning under. Secondly, we do have interpretation into English, French, and Spanish for this event, so please do select the appropriate language in the language panel under interpretation. So I guess some of you are asking, why are we having this event today? So, with the pandemic lockdowns and the global technological shifts we have seen, we did understand that these two factors had compelled businesses and organizations to move many of their functions online, digitalize their internal and external processes, and accelerate digital transformation. And these changes, of course, also impacted the processes related to the movement of goods across borders. And of course, with that comes customs issues. We did believe that a private sector perspective was essential to understand to what extent this digital transformation had affected trade in goods. We also wanted to understand, and this is taking it a little bit further, is whether as a result of these digital tools, whether trade had become more efficient, safe, and sustainable. So I do hope that these discussions will shed light on some of these questions, and really also to see what worked well and what didn't work well will be part of the conversation. So without delaying things any further, I would like to first of all introduce our four speakers, but before doing that, I would like to thank them really from the bottom of my heart for taking time out of their very, I would say, tight schedules to prepare for this webinar, because I should let you know that we actually did prep a lot for this webinar, and they were totally engaged and very kind and generous in terms of their time. So I would like to introduce you first to Ms. Asako Shibata, who is a global trade compliance manager covering the Asian region in Bell Textron Incorporated, a leading manufacturer of helicopters. And Mrs. Shibata is also a vice chair of the Global Customs and Trade Facilitation Commission at the ICC. Prior to this, Asako worked for Amazon as head of the Japan Trade Compliance. So welcome, Asako. Second, we have Mr. John Besick, who is the Director of the Customs and Trade Affairs of Microsoft, where he has been working for over 18 years. Without doubt, you're familiar with the software products that Microsoft develops, but apart from digital services, the company also produces goods. Mr. Besek is also chair of the Global Customs and Trade Facilitation Commission at the ICC. Welcome to you, John. We also have with us today Dr. Bimal Kantaria, who is the Managing Director of Elgin Kenya Limited, the largest producer of agricultural inputs such as chemicals, fertilizers, seeds, and so on, and is chairman of the Agriculture Sector Network in Kenya. Welcome to you, Bimal. And finally, we have Mr. Alejandro Terzian, who is the director of the Center of Excellence for International Trade and Customs Compliance in Bayer for Latin America, where he has been working for the past 18 years. Mr. Terzian is also the director at the Chamber of Exporters of the Argentine Republic and vice chair of the Global Customs and Trade Facilitation Commission at the ICC. So welcome to you, Alejandro. So thanks once again to our speakers. And without delaying things any further, I would like to launch the conversation by giving just a simple warm-up question, which is rather on the more general side, and then we will go into a round of more specific targeted questions, and then possibly take some questions from the audience after that. So just turning to the first question, I really wanted to, I guess everyone here is very interested to know, based on your experience and, experience both in the sector where you work and in the region where you are established, if you could share your insights as to how you have seen trade change because of digitalization in recent years, which may or may not have been actually prompted by COVID-19. And of course, if you can illustrate this sort of change through examples, that would be really, really also helpful and useful to the audience. So I would like to start by asking John perhaps to start the conversation. So John, over to you.
All right, thank you very much for this opportunity, and it's a pleasure for me to be part of this dialogue. When it comes to digitalization, you may be aware that Microsoft is one of the companies that created these digital solutions both for the private and public sectors. Prior to COVID, we were using digital solutions internally, testing them in-house, and external usage uptake was, let's say, somewhat limited. Some of the tools that we use internally to help in the area of trade are Power App, automation, product, HS, auto classification, the use of software bots to help answer questions, interact with customers, with suppliers. OCR technology, something that has been around for ages, for converting paper-based invoices to data so that we can digitize them. We use digital tools for auditing of invoices. We use contextual machine learning, and we leverage AI now more so. And all for the purpose of automating external queries, responses to create more efficiencies in the daily operations. During COVID, as borders closed or had limited operations, there was a realization by many countries that alternative solutions were actually needed to be able to keep the goods flowing across borders. And one of the most basic examples was the ability to communicate with customs officers. They were now not present during COVID at the border points in many jurisdictions, but were working from home. And something as basic as the use of email for communication, as opposed to hard copy letters and forms, electronic documents exchange, PDF files, was one of the solutions that helped keep trade moving. Deferred payments of duties and taxes, where payment could not be made physically, and countries did not have those facilities for electronic payment. And some countries implemented that, which facilitated further the flow. The pace of digitalization has increased significantly, as you're well aware. And digital solutions are the tools that enable this trade to continue. Pre-COVID, many countries had a significant reliance upon paper and manual-based processes, and that slowed down everything during COVID. For trade and goods, just a few recommendations I want to share with you. Number one is modernize. modernize the current operating models that exist, update the technology to handle the modern world trade that follows the pandemic. The legacy systems that we have been so reliant upon are actually not fit for this new era. Internally, Microsoft runs on digital processes. We run on data. However, we need to provide data as part of the trade process. And much of that data we need to transfer back to paper-based. We can be 100% digital internally, yet we cannot trade globally in a totally digital environment if external regulations, trading partners, or preferences even do not allow for that. Digitize. We need to digitize old paper-based forms so that data can be captured accurately and efficiently, reducing manual errors and improving compliance. And finally, digitalize. Digitalize processes so that they can be further automating, reducing time to process, allowing better analysis, using modern technology such as AI, machine learning. This also reduces the risk in trade. It improves a trader's status because they are better known and provides better targeting to reduce intentional and also unintentional fraud. The reality is humans can no longer process the amount of data that is being generated in international trade. The power and capability of AI can help to address this. Examples of where we use AI and machine learning internally is as an extension of our data analytics to train, to build predictive models for future product demand, product price, operation costs, and for optimizing operational resources. Where we have electronic invoices, we use this technology to detect anomalies in e-invoicing data. We leverage blockchain technology in our royalty payments. We use AI-powered capabilities within our Microsoft supply chain platform to recommend inventory allocation, freight planning, execution to support order fulfillment for our customers. So just a small sample of how we are leveraging technology in our trade space. Thank you.
Thanks very much, John. Well, you're certainly moving much faster than the WTO. We are undergoing a digital transformation process, but it is moving incrementally, I would humbly suggest. But thank you very much for that. So Asako, how about you? Please go ahead.
Thank you, Jose. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. It's an honor and a privilege to speak to you all today. I'm Masako Shibata, a trade compliance manager responsible for Asia Pacific region that includes Japan, Singapore, South Korea, China, and Australia. So I'm going to talk about my region. I would say global trade is rapidly changing toward more digitalization in recent years. In my region, they have some changes due to COVID-19. I can give an example. I don't know how many of you have ever heard about the Japanese stamp culture. Stamp is a kind of like the seal or stamp that is actually can be used for instead of like having the signatures on the contracts or agreements, any kinds of like application forms to the government authorities. So likewise, we needed a stamp for license application forms, for example, for the export or import before COVID-19, whereas it is not the case anymore. So we are the original equipment manufacturers of helicopters and in the USA. So we manufacture helicopters in the US and mostly in Canada. Our helicopters, for example, are US technology and may require export licenses to export from the US or anywhere in the world. For example, let's say we have a helicopter blades. The helicopter blades for the commercial customers, for example, it is not really subject to control, but let's assume that they are subject to control for the export. So before COVID-19, it was common practice for us to go to the competent export authority and submit the license application form in writing, meaning by papers with stamp. But after the pandemic, the COVID-19 has made the submission of such license application form to authorities completely paperless. Furthermore, license themselves also used to be issued digitally. No, it used to be issued by papers, but it's now issued by digitally through network system. I think this is a very significant, very major shift by the government authorities that they actually made. So after the COVID-19 and today, we can use the digital forms, like a digital license forms that can be like transferred between like the private sectors to the customs authority for the export and import. I think this is a great example and a very significant impact that we can see from the private sector's point of view. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sako. That was a great example. And I never knew about the stamp culture in Japan, but I've learned of it. And of course, I don't know if you're aware, but we do have the agreement on trade facilitation agreement here. You know, where the idea was to get rid of burdensome red tape. And of course, the call for digitalization is less prevalent in this agreement, but I think that's sort of where, you know, there is some movement in that direction right now. So thank you very much for that. And now I would like to give the floor to Dr. Kantaria. Bimal, please go ahead. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. So I'm calling from Kenya, as I mentioned earlier in my introduction. I think being a young country, one of the biggest advantages we have was we could leapfrog our technology, because we had a very, before COVID, our IT systems, telecom systems were still in infancy stage. And I'm really proud to say that during COVID, our government, private sector invested heavily in new tech, in new internet lines. So we could quite quickly jump from, you know, from coming into 4G or 5G, and that has completely revolutionized business in Kenya. Obviously, my previous speakers have talked about, you know, things like reducing cost of doing business, speed of efficiency. But let me quickly explain some of the massive advantages we got in sort of this huge jump in internet speeds, which I think is renowned, I think, in Africa. Of course, one of the most famous ones is M-Pesa. You know, if you all heard about M-Pesa, where we pay online, it's mobile payment online. But really, over the last 3 to 4 years, mobile payment has become the single biggest source of movement of money around the country, and has over doubled in the last 3 to 4 years, where nearly every single business is now using M-Pesa or mobile money to do transactions. Reduce cost of doing business, much easier to move money around, all that sort of stuff. The second one I wanted to commend at our government was just taking the services online. So far in the last year, Kenya government has moved about 5,000 services online. I mean, this is phenomenal considering where we are, 3-4 years ago. So things like passport applications, ID cards, driver's license, visas, all of those services. Previously, you had to come into Nairobi or into a big city to get your applications done. But now everything's done online. It's cheap. It's easy. The government has put mobile kiosks all over towns and villages. So even a person who hasn't got his own phone can walk into a government IT clinic or a kiosk, do the application, and within 6 to whatever days it is, he can get his documents out. I'm in the agriculture sector. My company is called Elgon Kenya, and we supply fertilizers to the floriculture industry. Bang, in the first couple of months of COVID was disastrous, like everybody else, as you can imagine, if you remember. But then a revolution happened. So Kenyan companies, some of them quite quickly became got on into online flower delivery, and some of our farms unbelievably could take on orders online from UK customers and deliver flowers from Kenya to the UK to the homes in 48 hours. And some of the businesses doubled over COVID by becoming online. So I think it's quite incredible, being such a small country, being such a new country, that Kenya sort of had leapfrogged its IT base during the COVID pandemic. And that revolution is speeding up as the last year or so post-COVID. And obviously things like reduction in cost of doing business, the speed of it all. In the first half the session I'll talk about some specific examples, but really it's quite impressive what we've done as a country in terms of the IT space post COVID and during COVID. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks very much, Vimal. And what would be interesting also is to see whether, in terms of the logistics of transferring the flowers, for example, in your example, whether how that worked and whether there was a shift also in terms of digitalization. And of course, we all know about the M-Pesa. It's touted as a gold standard around here. So thank you for that. And finally, we have Alejandro. Please go ahead, Alejandro.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much, and a very good afternoon to you all. May I first say to the organizers, the WTO, the ICC, thank you very much for having invited me. It's a great honor to be a member of this panel of so many distinguished professionals. As you know, Bayer is a life sciences company with 150 years of history and with skills which spread across that and into agriculture. In essence, pharmaceuticals, high technology, consumer products, also from pharmaceuticals, as well as agricultural sciences. As you know, throughout the pandemic, we were in the pharmaceutical industry, but not just, but also in agricultural areas. We were hit by the fact that we were less impacted by restrictions in other sectors. One operation continued at practically the same levels as pre-pandemic. Now, it's clear that throughout the pandemic, digitalization processes did step up in certain areas. Now, I'm from Argentina, but my remarks extend across the Latin American region, and I do have certain experience to share with you from that period. One thing we experienced was how customs authorities pushed digitalization for official processes and procedures rather for importation. Now, here, digitalization doesn't just mean boarding certificates, but also certificates of origin, which in today's environment are things which have been able to continue without causing any impact. We also noted that throughout the pandemic, there was some backsliding. In other words, we've gone back to pre-pandemic levels. So we pushed for roughly a year and a half. There were gradual increases, but now we've gone back. And this is something that has had an impact on our international trade operations. Now, another example I'd like to raise, which is something you all know about, the authorized economic operator. Now, in Colombia, but not alone, also Peru, we saw cases where the pandemic led to consequences such as all of these certified authorized economic operators, all of them had the facility to move their customs through these facilitated procedures for more than a year. Now, this was the case in Colombia. We saw very high levels of performance where they were able to meet all of the market supply objectives for pharmaceuticals. Again, counter to, well, there's a difference between what was before and afterwards, but we have seen how this, in a certain way, has allowed us to meet some of our goals. Now, another significant area of improvement is SPS certificates, the ePhyto certificates. Here we saw not just an advance or progress in terms of single country experience, but I could say a range of countries, various countries. As you know, when it comes to releasing goods in customs, you don't just need trade documents, but also you need SPS certificates. And this has been a great boost to international trade. Another reflection is that if we were to go back to authorizing in customs in certain countries, the digitalization of documents in PDF format, and to do an ex post control, obviously this is just for trustworthy and certified operators. Now, another example from the private sector is that some chambers undertook an initiative for digital certificates, for certificates of origin for countries with non-preferential trade agreements. One example is the Republic of Argentina's Importers Chamber, which saw this also as a great help when it comes to international trade operations. Certainly, as we move forward, we will be able to show more examples. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And this round was just sort of a warm-up round, and we will perhaps go into more specific targeted questions. And I'd like to start with you, Bimal. You've given some examples already of what the government had done, but I would like to have more details in terms of what the government did, and perhaps you had also mentioned that you would have some examples to share, perhaps in a bit more detail. What the government did in terms of digitalization, but also what might be interesting to hear from you is, what you could highlight as, what was a best practice and perhaps something which did not work so well. It might be interesting for us to hear both what worked and what didn't work in your view. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, so I did allude to it earlier that I think this whole revolution in IT worked really quickly because government and private sector worked a lot together. I don't know where other countries' experiences, but we set up a joint government and Kenyan and private sector task force during that COVID period, and we pushed a lot of our agenda onto government, and they listened, which is wonderful. So I'll give you an example. I'll give you two examples. One is in our customs. Our whole customs management moved online. So we have a system called KenTrade. I mean, if you just Google it, KenTrade Kenya, linked with ICMS, which is the Integrated Customs Management System, which basically has moved the whole importation, exportation business online. So they're sitting in our office. I think there's an echo somewhere. Sitting in our office, we can actually complete the documentation for importing any goods and exporting any goods from the comfort of our offices. And it's very, very simple. You get a pro forma invoice, you load it up. The system has a lot of automation in it. So if the document itself is correct, automatically an IDF, an import declaration form comes out. When the goods are shipped out, you can either load it on or scan it and load it onto the system. The machine will read it. It gives you back how much duty and customs or VAT to pay. You pay that online again using M-Pesa or bank-to-bank transfer. And all this information is then relayed to the port of Mombasa where goods are released. So it's what the advantage has been, besides obviously the whole speed of reaction and all that, is completely eliminated human interface. I mean, some people may say that's a bad thing, but in our case, it's just reduced if it's corruption or documents missing. All that information, all that stuff that used to happen has all disappeared. Things are quicker, smoother, and it's much more transparent. Of course, there is a backup system, meaning if you're not happy with any of the decisions made by the system, there's a mechanism for arbitration and all that. But at least 95 or 99% of all transactions are done pretty smoothly, and it works really well and efficiently. So a downside of that may be that, I think the technology hasn't kept up in a way that so much interaction is done online and so much movement and transactions happen online that the government keeps having to spend money on enhancing their systems all the time, which is obviously an expensive process. But nevertheless, in the long term, I'm sure it's going to pay back. The taxation revenue coming out from customs and imports and exports has obviously dramatically increased because there's no one in the middle to change documents or documents missing. So government revenue has also massively gone up, and revenue has come in. So some of these examples where the Kenyan government has been pushing heavily for, particularly in customs, I think there's been an exciting part of this whole IT revolution. The negative, of course, is that because a lot of this is online, if anything goes wrong, as I mentioned, sometimes it does, then you have to have an arbitration process, and that again, you got to come offline, and then the human element comes in. But again, it's not obviously brilliant and not 100% foolproof. So those are some of the negatives. And also, if you're not IT competent, or if your business isn't fully connected or whatever, then you might be in trouble. And that's why I mentioned earlier, government has reached out and put in all these IT kiosks all over the place, which are manned by young people who are IT savvy, and they generally help people to load on their documents and all that. Yeah, so I think the Kenyan example is quite interesting. You might want to just Google it as ICMS and KenTrade in Kenya, just to see how this whole revolution has taken part in Kenya. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bimal. I will be getting to one of the other questions about, if there is need for some human contact in this world of paperless, contactless trade. But before that, I would like to go back to John and ask him really just in terms of the specific digital tools. There's a lot of reference to, tools such as artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, blockchain, 3D printing and so forth. I mean, in all of these, what do you think has made a big difference to your company in terms of these digital tools?
All right, thank you very much for that question. I always go back to the basic principle. The first question that you always need to ask yourself is, what is the problem that you are trying to solve for? What is the issue that you're trying to address with technology? Technology or digital tools, you mentioned a few products. They can be also scary, they can be daunting. And regarding humans, they can be on either extreme or they can be anywhere along the continuum. But at the end of the day, the question on these tools is, what do you want to accomplish with them? Internally, we look at tools, at digital tools, as a way of being able to achieve more, whether it be blockchain, whether it be AI. We look at it in a way of helping us to be more productive, helping address some of society's most pressing needs. We'll touch on it a little later on the environment. Digital tools in reality drive more efficiency. They drive cost reduction for ourselves, for our customers, and adopting variations of these technologies works in that direction. The most impactful in the realm of digital tools is actually still in the process of being rolled out, and that is artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is transformative in nature, and it is likened to the changes that took place during the Industrial Revolution. We use AI and machine learning internally. It helps create new business models. Using it externally, it will help others create new business models of the future. And this can cover all industry sectors, from agriculture to high tech. One quote I want to give is from Richard Baldwin. He's an economist at the Geneva Graduate Institute in Switzerland. And he said something very important during a panel discussion in 2023 at the World Economic Forum Growth Summit. It says, AI won't take your job. It's somebody using AI that will take your job. So technology is a tool to help advance what your needs are. Although AI is getting a lot of attention now, it's not the be-all, it's not the end-all. There is a blockchain technology or distributed ledger technology that has been around for many years now. There's been a lot of hype, but very limited deployment. And one of the basic issues there is that it is not very well understood. The concept is very straightforward. However, implementation is often complex, and there is a very limited amount of participation that is taking place. So it has not taken off as the potential exists for it. Another challenge for organizations in using blockchain has been in managing data privacy. Since based on the principle of a blockchain, everybody would have a copy of the ledger. Everyone has access to the data, and this is understandably undesirable from the private sector in cases where information is commercially sensitive or it can be security sensitive. And that is why what we're using internally in Microsoft is Azure Confidential Ledger, which addresses these concerns. Time doesn't permit to cover all the other technologies which we're using, but you mentioned IoT. We use IoT with something called digital twins. It has the huge potential to transform customs operations from the tracking of goods from source to final destination. It gives unprecedented insight into what is happening in almost near real time. Once again, it's a tool, it's a platform that creates a digital representation of real world objects. So you're able to track it, to manage it in a digital world. So once again, what is the purpose? What do you want to accomplish? There are different tools for the job depending on what you want to do. Thank you.
Thanks very much, John. And, I would certainly like to come back to AI, maybe perhaps a bit later on, especially, the sentence which came out from the letter signed by over 350 CEOs about, mitigating the risk of extinction from AI should be a global priority alongside other societal scale risks such as the pandemic and nuclear war. So they kind of put that at the same level of the pandemic. And it's interesting to hear your take. And probably at the end of the day, it's how AI is used or leveraged, which is the most important. But thank you very much for that. And now I'd like to turn to Asako and just come back to this aspect of contactless and paperless trade. I mean, in your view, Asako, do you think that there is still a place or a value added for in-person kind of interaction in the trading ecosystem, or particularly in relation to your company? So please go ahead.
Thank you, Mrs. Suger. Yes, I would say yes for some extent. It really depends, like how much you actually integrate or implement the processes in the digitalization area. For our company, we still often interact with customs broker rather than directly with customs authorities. And generally speaking, some customs brokers offer usually like electronic data interchange, EDI, or application programming interface, API, to exchange trade data, such as like harmonized type schedule code or export control classification numbers or valuation descriptions of the items with your in-house system. So unless you have the such kind of like implemented into the system that you already have in your company, it is more like it actually like creates more interaction with the customs brokers. So likewise, my company in my region, we don't really establish the EDI or API connection to the brokers, so which actually like still creates a lot of interaction with them still today. I think for some context, it's good because we can communicate through the email or phone calls to give us precise instruction for the customs broker what to do about the items to import into the country, especially like with the some customers who really would like to have like a very precise delivery instructions, and we have to give the customs brokers in advance such instructions through the emails or some kind of like a communication. It won't happen if it's like just transfer the data through the in a digitalization form. So but on the other hand, some carriers such as like integrators, they provide digital platforms, and digital platforms you can create shipments, requests, or upload commercial invoices into their system, or input the data directly to their system to declare to the customs. So it's more like paperless compared to the customs brokers piece, but they also offer like a cargo tracking system from end to end. So you'll be able to know exact location of your items, like whether your item is still at the customs border waiting for the customs clearance, or they need some like inspection at the customs authorities, or they're on its way to the, to the destination. So it really depends like what channel actually like you use from private sector's point. This because many private sectors like my company as well do not have enough any personnel who hold expertise of customs declarations with brokerage licenses to declare to customs in that region, or they may hesitate to have such, a service in-house still today. It is therefore we generally use the customs brokers to declare to customs for import and export, and the customs brokers, they review and assess information provided by us on behalf of us, and also attend the customs random inspection, for example, at the bonded area at the airports, and where we may not have the enough personnel to attend those like inspections on time. And they sometimes, the customs broker, for example, they sometimes pay duty and tax in advance for us, which is also like a benefit. And so by having those like a customs brokers and interact with them, we may not have to bear the cost of having expertise in our company, or like a maintain declaration operation in an effective manner or timely manner at any time or anywhere. So I would say, yes, it is still, for some context, we actually need some like interaction with the those customs brokers, or maybe customs authority to keep communicating each other. Thank you.
Thanks, Asako. And perhaps I could ask the same question of you, Alejandro, and then we will probably move into taking some questions from the box or from the audience. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Well, this is a very interesting and important topic, and I would like to add to what the previous speaker said. And I think that there are two dimensions here. On the one hand, we have the logistical or transactional dimension, where here I definitely believe that we are moving toward greater technology, as was well said before, and perhaps less contact with, or no contact with, public officials and customs agents. This may be irreversible. But on the other hand, I would like to share some experiences and my personal vision about the importance of relations with public officials and the role of public officials based on the trade facilitation agreement and public-private relations. I think that both concepts are complementary. They are not mutually exclusive. Whereas on the one hand, new technologies continue to move forward and they do simplify import and export processes. On the other hand, I think that relations to discuss strategic matters with customs officials, in my perspective, is fundamental. And I'll give you some examples where we've had very successful experiences. For example, one area that I find very important has to do with customs valuation, where it's a sensitive matter for customs around the world, especially for companies like our own, where we have operations that are complex. And we've had discussions and very good outcomes from our discussions with customs in terms of royalties, in terms of how to implement certain agreements. And Article 8 and Article 7 of GATT related to adjustments. So when we incorporate or not certain costs, and the experience has been positive, not just for my company, it's also been highly valued by customs authorities. Because given the complexity of these discussions. We were able to speak eye to eye on complex technical matters, and that has led to some great results. On the other hand, another example that I can share as a success story is our processes to achieve the certification of authorized economic operator in Argentina. Bayer was the first company in Argentina to be certified as an authorized economic operator. And throughout the process, we have had fluid and direct discussions with customs authorities. We were able to exchange views. We were able to learn from the authorities about their criteria, their approaches, and we were also able to propose scenarios, very specific scenarios that apply to our company, and that has led to great results. In countries like those in Latin America, relations with the authorities are important because they allow you to understand their approach to certain government measures. For example, their criteria for certain export licenses or import licenses, and to understand the spirit of the regulations for officials. And when we work through third parties or agents and so on, we lose some of that communication depth. So those relations have been critical when it comes to doing business internationally. That is what I wanted to share on this. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Alejandro. Yes, we do know a little bit about the valuation agreement because, it's a WTO agreement. And so, of course, Article 7 of the GATT sort of lays out the principles, and then we have the agreement which elaborates on those principles, and Article 8 adjustments too. And of course, the complexities of related party transactions and how do you incorporate that into the value, etc. So yes, and I think discussion with customs is, there's also a Uruguay round decision that speaks about the need for customs authorities to seek additional information, so that there is that perhaps that sort of in-person interaction really built a bit there. But thank you very much for that. And now we're just going to take some of the questions from the questions that actually have already been submitted. And please, feel free to, whoever would like to sort of step in. I'm just going to go one by one. It might be easier for the audience. But we had a question from Chantal Tuyishimir from the Tony Blair Institute, from the Ministry of Trade and Industry from Rwanda. And she asked the question, how is the private sector influenced by non-harmonized payment systems? So would you like me to repeat that question? How is the private sector influenced by non-harmonized payment systems? Anybody want to hop in? I can see John moving, so go ahead, please, John. Yeah.
I'd be happy to comment initially, and my colleagues can feel free to add to it. But one of the things that industry or traders look for is certainty, looking at common standards and processes to simplify things, to help them understand what is required. The more, let's say, or separate payment systems it's a learning curve. It's programming that is required in companies' internal systems to be able to pay in the right fashion, provide the right data that the authorities are looking for. All of this is very doable. However, the reality is that it adds costs and creates additional complexities. It also gives rise to errors that may happen, because it is the company that's doing the trading and they have to adjust. Companies have adjusted over the years, but the ultimate goal would be to have more consistency, more uniformity, and that would help looking at smaller traders. If we want to encourage them to go to digital platforms, it would help them adapt more readily and be able to compete. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, John. Would anybody else like to hop in there, or I can move straight on to the next one, which is how can trade be simplified to support the growth of e-commerce in the 21st century? The use of de minimis is critical for small businesses, especially women-owned business in developing countries. And what can be done to preserve this regulation? And this question comes from Karen Kelly, EMTC from the United States. Anybody like to? Bimal, maybe you? I think I missed a question for you on SMEs, if I'm not mistaken. Earlier on.
Yeah, that SME is probably an easier question than the question coming from America. I don't know what DMIST is. I don't know what DMIST is. Maybe somebody can explain to me.
Oh yeah, de minimis is what you have as so for example, if you take the example of the United States, you have $800 de minimis, which means that any package which goes below that value, it has no customs duty, so it's exempt from customs duty. So that's basically it, and every country has a different de minimis, so there's no harmonized approach to that. But if you find that if that is a question which requires a bit more thought amongst the panelists,
I'm happy to touch on it.
Go ahead, please, John. Yeah, please go ahead.
Looking at what has happened because of the de minimis in the United States and also around the world, e-commerce has exploded onto the scene. First of all, looking at the pros, the benefits, it has helped companies sell their goods in ways that they have not been able to before. One of the largest benefits is also to MSMEs. They can sell goods now in ways that they were not able to. There are fewer requirements. But when looking at the minimus levels, they vary per country, and that's understandable. Each country has, their own regulations for the purposes that they've established, the different levels. But one of the things that we need to look at within the de minimis levels is what are the goods that are being sent? There has to be visibility. Customs authorities need to know what is included. So there has to be a minimal amount of data that is reported. As international traders, we look at things, from let's say an operational perspective. How can we do things more efficiently? How can we meet our customers' demands? We don't spend so much time focusing on the challenges that governments face, on illegal goods, on smuggling, on things that are happening. And I think by partnering with the private sector in this area, we can help build and develop solutions that would not harm or, let's say, limit the de minimis levels and potentially even increase it in other jurisdictions. So, we need to be able to know who is sending the goods and what are the goods, and be able to provide that in advance to customs authorities so that they can do their screening. We don't want to delay shipments. We don't want to reduce what has benefited, let's say, society overall, but we need to do this in a very intelligent and a controlled manner to ensure that goods are not entering countries to, hurt individuals or to hurt business. So a lot still needs to be done in that area, but I think de minimis levels have opened a door for opportunities that did not exist before in trade.
Yes, thank you very much. And I think the reason for the question is that, the second part was what can be done to preserve this regulation, because there is, of course, and I think particularly as this question came from somebody in the US, there was some discussion, or at least there was a proposal put forward to reduce the $800 further. And of course, it was for the reason you mentioned, but it was also to kind of maybe counter a certain amount of competition coming from, other countries in terms of small packages and goods sort of being made at lower cost, essentially. So that was probably it. But actually, just coming back to the small and medium enterprises, I just perhaps, Bimal, just coming back to you, because I did miss out this question, and I think it would be interesting to hear, how your views, at least, on how you think SMEs fared in the digitalization process, and what were some of the issues that SMEs faced and how those could be addressed better? Thank you.
Thanks, Suja. Yeah, so I'll give you a couple of examples. I think those are quite important. First of all, there was a big concern, obviously, about this digital divide. You know, people said the high-tech countries would pull ahead and other countries would struggle. There was also a big debate about small versus big companies and small companies, about the digital divide and the cost of all that. So my own example, my own feeling is that it hasn't been as dramatic or as bad as it was initially touted as. If you look at companies, small SME companies, a lot of these companies, a lot of these applications have gone onto the mobile phone. So we have like 98 to 99% mobile penetration. So a lot of these services have gone onto the mobile phone. So you no longer have to buy any sort of desktop or expensive computer system. So the cost of software has dramatically dropped. And I want to thank Microsoft for doing some of this great stuff. But there, a lot of IT companies like his have brought, you know, down to a mobile phone, you can do virtually anything. So SMEs haven't had to have a massive capital expenditure to keep up. Countries have also, small countries or maybe less developed countries, have also had an opportunity to leapfrog technology. So I know the Americans don't like some of these big Chinese tech companies, but really they have brought down the cost of infrastructure, technology infrastructure dramatically down. So even smaller countries can now afford to have 4G or 5G in their country. So, you know, things haven't been as bad as they were initially touted as. But I'll give you a great example of how technology has small companies. In Kenya, one of the biggest growing business has been online lending, money lending, from the big traditional banks to even massive amount of new companies have come onto the business front, where you can actually tap onto mobile money within a couple of hours if you want to, you know, borrow money for your company. It's relatively easy to borrow small sums of money using your own phone. Of course, there is a concern about high interest rates or whatever, but the availability is there for small firms to borrow $100, $200, $300 on a daily basis to fund their businesses. And incredibly enough, Suja, that's become probably the largest amount of lending is now done online, and majority of those borrowers have been small and medium companies or even individuals. Our own Kenyan government, when they won the elections, came out with their own Hustler Fund. It's called a Hustler Fund, where a massive amount of money was put into this online lending app, which is run by the Kenyan government, and it's much cheaper than if you go to a commercial online lending company. And you won't believe, most of the money that is borrowed is like $1, $2, $3, and it's repaid on 24 hours, 48 hours on your phone. So even the smallest person can have access to a little bit of money to run his company or his kiosk. And of course, the massive increase in employment has just been on this online shopping, online delivery, and all this food deliveries, the Uber, all that sort of stuff could never have happened hadn't it been for this IT technology jump that we've all experienced in the last 2 years. If you look at Nairobi alone, in a small capital like Nairobi, I think we have 5,000 taxi drivers online, and we have 9 or 10 different apps that you can use online, including Uber and all of them. Food deliveries, even your border body, your small picky drivers now online, which is quite incredible. And the amount of new jobs have been created just because of that. You have to be impressed where we were 5 years ago, where we are now, and considering all that doom and gloom about how bad the shift's going to be. So small companies traditionally have been quite nimble in getting around systems and moving forward. So I think this has been a great example of what you can do when you really push to the wall. So I'm a positive, Suja, as you can imagine. So it's all good. Obviously challenges on the side, but I'm sure we all know that. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Would anybody else like to jump in on their experience of the SMEs and how SMEs have fared in their region? Well, I just wanted to mention, Bimal, that, in WTO, please go ahead, Alejandro. I was just filling in the time with my comments.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just did want to say one thing, though, because it's been very interesting listening to Dr. Bimal. Really, from other countries such as Latin America, and their perspective is the same. We are also faced with great difficulties when it comes to getting access to that technology for these companies. Now, of course, when we talk about technology such as 5G, it doesn't exist still in certain countries. And this divide, therefore, is large, that although if there is an aim or intention to go this way, it's not something that's feasible. And that implies that the divide is too great between what John has been saying and what Dr. Beamer has been saying. That access for technology for SMEs. This contrast of two regions in the world where things are very different, despite the fact that these large companies or having access to these technologies or the knowledge, I think that small and particularly micro-sized enterprises are a little bit further away from having that access. So that's all I really wanted to add. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Alejandro. That was quite important. And I just wanted to say that we do have a group working on MISME's issues, and I do believe that they were also looking at this aspect of finance, and perhaps a Kenyan example would be a good one to share in that context. But maybe they've already done it. I'm not sure, but it seems to me that this is something that would be good to share. Now, I would like to look at, our Director General has said many times that the future of trade is services, digital, and green. And I would like to sort of look at this this green element and perhaps, John, come to you and ask you to what extent does digitalization in your company contribute to the environment and sustainability issues? And I think I would sort of also ask other panelists to jump in, perhaps after John, to pick up on this question. Thank you.
All right, happy to answer that, Suja. Environment and sustainability is of paramount importance to my company. One of the questions, that sometimes arise is, will international trade now decrease? Will it diminish? Because people are looking at more locally sourced goods. They're trying to reduce, emissions. So they're looking at what can be produced domestically, consumed domestically. We have the pandemic as an example that really helped reduce the carbon footprint. But looking at overall, trade, it's not realistic to expect that trade will decrease based on how things are currently going. The solution that we're looking at is the environment needs to be an integral part of international trade solutions. And it is possible with the proper planning, cooperation, legislation to achieve these goals. But one of the things that we also need to keep in mind is that solutions must not be punitive, but they should be incentivizing. Companies are willing to go in this work along these lines, but when we're looking at all the challenges that are coming to companies that are trading internationally, there need to be incentives to help companies along. To share Microsoft's goal, what we are targeting is by 2030, we will be carbon negative. And by 2050, Microsoft will have removed from the environment all the carbon that the company has emitted either directly or by electrical consumption since it was founded in 1975. So these are pretty high, lofty goals, but this is what we are working towards. The reality is we cannot do this in isolation. So we are working with our partners, our suppliers, other stakeholders to be able to make this collective difference. One great example is today of the positive contribution to the environment. This webinar, we are using technology. We are holding it virtually. And just think of the impact to the environment if we all needed to travel to Geneva. At Microsoft, internally, we use Teams. And for us, it has generated significant cost savings and travel costs, but it has also provided a meaningful positive impact on the environment, which is what we're trying to address. To reduce our operational impact, we are using digital tools to measure, to monitor, to optimize our energy usage, our water usage, our waste. And this is done through collecting data. And I know there's this continual focus on on the tools that exist, but it's really the data that is of the paramount importance if we're looking at environmental benefit and impact. To analyze the data streams, to aggregate the data so we can look at what is actually happening, look at what we are consuming, how we can save further, and identify the anomalies that are occurring so that we could zero in on them, target them, and address them. When you think about the vast amounts of data that companies create from their sales activities, from procurement, from manufacturing, from logistics, from travel, from facilities expenses, investments, we would be extremely challenged to manage all this data without digitalization. So we use tools internally. You know, some of these tools are built on our Power Platform. They include Power Apps, Power Automate, Power BI. We use large data models through our Dataverse, Data Lake, Synapse, all this to collect data so that we can analyze it, so that we can process it in our Microsoft Azure cloud. It's being able to look at what is actually happening and then use the technology further to be able to reduce these environmental impacts. Internally at Microsoft, the view that we have taken is environmental action through technology usage. Technology can definitely make an impact. It can help us achieve the goals that we are desiring to achieve. And it's all how data is being gathered and how it is used. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, John. Would any other panelists like to come in on this question?
So Susha, I'll give you another example from Kenya, for instance. So a lot of our flowers, as you know, were exported out using air freight. Now there's a big drive to get it by ship to Europe, simply because, of course, the environmental, whatever. So that could only have been done using IT, because the systems are so robust these days. You can actually track when the ship is coming into Mombasa. You can actually track when your consignment reaches the destination. That could only happen if there was a really good IT system in the background doing all this stuff, and it couldn't have happened a couple of years ago. So about 20 to 30% of our flowers are now being exported via containerized, refrigerated containers into Europe, which is obviously massive savings all around. So some of these new technologies are really just going to improve the way we move stuff around the world and make it obviously much more environmentally friendly. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Anybody else? I mean, just from our perspective at the WTO, we have the trade facilitation agreement. So the aspect is, the point is that if you do reduce the sort of log jams around the customs areas, then you don't get lorries parked outside, customs and sort of, especially the refrigerated lorries, which would then have to keep their engines running in order to store the food. If you do have this sort of more paperless and borderless customs, contactless customs rather, then it just flows. But then the other argument somebody raised with me is that, well, you might have this situation where you have the lorry under such a circumstance going 2 or 3 times or making the trip 3 or 4 or 5 times, which might add to the carbon emissions. So it's difficult to know if there is a net gain or not. But generally, I would imagine that, if you can get lorries just flowing and not stuck at the border, that would already help the environment quite a bit. So if there's no other remark on that, I would like to, are there any more questions on? Okay. So yeah, this is a question from Yarua Vasquez, and the question is, are there good practices regarding remote inspections using technology like closed camera systems to avoid waiting times for authorities to perform physical inspection of goods? Anybody want to take that question?
I can share an example from the US, what US CBP was doing in their CTPAT validation or auditing, which is the US AEO program. Because of COVID, they were reliant upon technology to be able to conduct remote revalidations. And using technology, it is possible to do so. The AEO programs provide greater certainty in what traders are doing. There is that greater visibility to what is happening at point of export during the shipment of the goods. So absolutely, technology can be leveraged for those purposes. And the more the trading partners are known, the better known they are, the more comfort customs authorities, governments will have in leveraging these technologies for these types of purposes. And it's not a pandemic that necessitates this use. To be able to drive more efficiencies, we can look at expanding this to our daily trade practices where goods can, there can be greater certainty at time of export where things can occur, for reviews can occur, rather than at the time or in place of import. So those opportunities exist for leveraging technology. It is coming to those agreements to leverage the technology that already exists.
Thanks very much for that, John. And I'm going to, in fact, I'm going to ask maybe colleagues. Oh, sorry, Alejandro, please go ahead. Yeah.
Yes. Just to add to what John was saying on, let me give you an example. In Latin America, in those companies which do use the AOE system, this is monitored by cameras and is something that refers to technology being used for certification and is particularly helping us where there's no direct contact. Another example we have in our own company is in-house customs. In other words, our own customs authority. This is a system where monitoring is also done using cameras and, again, allows the digitalization of goods entering and leaving from a digital perspective. Now, there are other special systems. Very few countries use them. And I think I don't see here such a large divide between what John was saying and what's happening in our country. So there, it's a contrast to the large divide we were discussing earlier with MISMIS. I think in this respect, we are much more aligned when it comes to those kind of inspections. And again, for custom certificates. Thank you.
Thanks, Alejandro. There is another question from Jessica Hold, and the question is, if you had to identify one thing, what do you foresee as the single most important development in the digitalization of trade for governments to be aware of in the next 5 to 10 years in their bilateral trade relationships? Yes, this might require some thought. A single most important development in the digitalization of trade for governments to be aware of in the next 5 to 10 years in their bilateral trade relationships.
I can answer by, maybe I can say a couple of things. One is obviously over-reliance on technology is obviously a big worry. So I'll give you, obviously this Ukraine and Russia thing has completely disrupted the whole chain. So a lot of companies were relying on just-in-time deliveries, and so trade is not easy. It's not predictable as much as we think it is. Obviously, a big worry is that. Secondly, is all these trade tensions between the couple of big three developed nations or developing nations, and how they treat each other. I think that has such a huge effect on smaller countries like us. There's a saying that when the big elephants fight, the ants get squashed. So I think some of these things are quite important to countries like ours. We had nothing to do with this Ukraine war, but we had such a huge penalty to it. So I think some of these big nations have got to be a bit more sensitive to what the things they do happens to the rest of the world. And of course, this over dependence on tech. If tech goes down, we're all in serious trouble. Just 2 examples. Thanks.
Yeah, and to add to my colleague's comment, touching on the tech side, technology is indeed an enabler. It is a facilitator, but the private and public sectors need to work together to ensure that as we move further into this digitalization environment, that the security guardrails are in place. You know, we are cognizant of criminal elements that exist there, and it is only through partnering together that we can address and preserve the gains that we have made collectively as you know as a world. What I would suggest as well is looking at technology where it's going, that there needs to be greater control over things like AI. We don't want it to get out of hand. We make tools as a company that can be used for the right purposes, but we need the government support. We need the partnership with them to put those guardrails, to put those parameters in place so that traders can continue using these tools. So I would say, as I alluded to earlier, the Industrial Revolution, there was great concern about what that was going to do to the world. Looking back at it, we could have managed it better. Looking at the lessons learned, can we not leverage the lessons learned to manage more effectively and efficiently, protecting, trading, protecting society with the tools? So looking at trade agreements as they are being developed, it is not always a race to the bottom to get zero duty rates everywhere, but how to do this to enable companies to continue to trade. And I think technology needs to be part and parcel of trade agreements as we go forward.
In fact, it's interesting you spoke on this, John, because there was a question from Karen Kelly from the US where she says that there is a discussion on pausing AI development. And this also refers to that sentence I had read out, the AI, some of the AI creators and leaders and academics. So she says there's a discussion on pausing AI development, and what impact would that have on digital trade? And I guess the question is probably addressed to you, John, because you had.
I'll give it a shot. But looking at digital trade existed before AI came on the scene. So looking at AI is a tool that will help facilitate digital trade. Within digital trade, you're looking at everything from, listening to music, listening or watching videos. You're looking at, movement of different types of services, but you're also looking at physical goods that are facilitated through digital means. So AI does indeed need to be managed, and governments are critical in this part as well, working with traders, working with companies that are producing tools which contain AI. There could be an impact, definitely, but we want, to do this intelligently going forward. Microsoft has been calling for regulation in this space well before November of last year when, ChatGPT came on the scene. We want to do the right thing. We want to be able to partner with governments to do the right thing for their countries. And, digital trade, if not done correctly, if not, using the tools properly, will be impacted. And we do not want to impact it negatively. So that's why we want to address it proactively. Stopping the development of AI, whether it's realistic or not, is not my call, but it is going ahead. And some countries may restrict its development, but it will continue in other countries where perhaps it shouldn't be developed. So that is all the things that we need to look at collectively and balance, the benefits versus the risks. And the only way we can do that is working collectively together, public and private.
Thank you very much for that, John. Are there any other remarks from any other panelists here at this stage? Alejandro, please.
Yes, just on what John was saying. First, yes, it should be regulated. Anything to do with artificial intelligence should be. but as the revolution itself is going to allow us to be able to automate many things and allowing us to start working on fresh areas of added value. And I think we are going to come to a paradigm change where everything that we've been doing, or a lot of what we've been doing in international trade, not just in trade, but in other areas, of course, here we're focused on trade, but these are going to change, and we're somehow going to need more professional preparation on the understanding that when we talk about AI, we're saying there are machines that we're going to think and think already. All of the technology in the past we saw replacing things, and we're moving on to technology which can think and is helping us to even make new strategies which are better. So I think this is going to bring us to the next level when it comes to trade operations. I think it's a great opportunity before us, and we should make the most of it.
Thanks very much, Alejandro. So, yeah, I guess, there is, of course, the EU AI Act, which is probably going to be coming out around sometime in June. And that could have a big impact. In fact, the head of ChatGPT, so I think they're called, I've forgotten the company's name, but he sort of said that, they're not sure they'll be able to function on the EU market if this legislation comes out. So it's interesting that, to what extent one can regulate that. But I also heard that you have AI which can imitate, there are AI sound systems which can imitate people's voices, which means it is being used to misinform people. So for example, you might have somebody pretending to be, I don't know, President Trump saying something, and that has caused a lot of effect in social media, etc. So really, the use of AI can be, I guess it can be really beneficial or can be equally harmful depending on its use. So that's probably it. But listen, we're coming to the end of the session, and I just wanted to just perhaps go to the final question, which won't be surprising given where we are. But I just wanted to get your insight about, how do you see the role of the WTO in all of this digitalization space and in terms of our conversation? And frankly, any final remarks or thoughts you would like to share? And once you've made your remarks, then I will give the floor to the ICC to make concluding remarks. So whoever would like to start, please just feel free to jump in. Maybe Asako? Oh, sorry, Bimo. I was going to ask Asako if, yeah, it's okay. Asako and then Bimo, please.
Hello. So it's going to be me first?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Sorry. Sorry, Bimaro. So I believe the WTO has played a significant role in responsibility for international trade, and it's the only organization to regulate rules among the countries. So in the digital era, I believe the WTO continued working closely with members countries, as well as like a private sectors like us, to create global policy procedures to enhance security of digital information in flow in worldwide. I think that the last, the conversation was really a great example about AI, because it's really ironic to use AI. Who is going to assess the data produced by AI is accurate or not? So it's kind of like ironic to say like, how are we going to assess those data, or like who does that? And is it going to be a blockchain to security the data, like the original data that provided by the private sectors for the import export, or is it something else? So there's no rules in place yet for global trade, I believe. And so I believe the WTO can help that to accelerate more speed and place the rules for the global digital economy for the members country, for example, like the digital economy partnership agreement among us. And I believe that by doing so, it can help more like a mutual recognition among the countries and the policy to enhance global future trade. Thank you.
Thank you. Sasako. Please, Bima.
So I think just to I think the WTO needs to work in hand with the United Nations and stop all this Ukraine stuff happening again. Because my goodness, it disrupted trade in Kenya. 60% of our food comes from Ukraine, so you can imagine what happens to our grain prices and all that. So these global challenges can have massive impact on countries like ours. But the more important one, I think WTO needs to help us a lot, is this Africa Free Trade Agreement, which we are right now in the middle of negotiating with one another. Extremely important for the whole of Africa. It's the first time ever that initiative has been at a continental level. We're trying to bring all the countries together under one framework. Kenya, I think, is the only country that has now signed up to it. I think Kenya and one or two other countries. So if WTO wants to do anything really positive for Africa, this is it. The African Free Trade Agreement needs a whole bunch of capacity building, IT systems, all that really needs to be put in. And also, of course, a meeting of minds, which I think you guys are experts at, and just bring us all together on the table, make sure everybody, all the African countries signs up to it and gets it going, because there's a win-win for everybody in Africa for this agreement. It really is a great initiative that we've taken as a nation, as a continent. But as you know, there are stumbling blocks, there are politics, which I think a neutral body like WTO can resolve, just by putting us on the same table. I know there was an initiative. I met some of you guys here a month ago talking about it. But if there's anything you really want to contribute to Africa, is that agreement. It is quite important to get it done. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Bima. So, Alejandro, perhaps?
Yes, thank you. I think the role of the WTO is key in today's environment. We're looking at a volatile, even ambiguous environment. And this is what is having an impact on the fifth industrial revolution. Fine, this is what we're talking about a lot today. And I think this is precisely where the role of the WTO is at this critical moment. Also, we can share and discuss the future of trade, free and predictable. And I think in recent weeks in Latin America, we've seen national trade facilitation committees meeting, and this is therefore an important topic. Yes, the sophistication of international negotiations has reached new levels, and it's only going to go further in this direction. And in this trend, all actors, and when I say all actors, governments, companies, all international operators, we're all swiftly adapting to these changes. And I think it's a case of either adapting to change or suffering the complexity that we see in current negotiations. So when it comes to the issues, challenges facing companies, we need to go into further depth on the tools in the TFA. This is absolutely critical. So this is my view on how important the role of the WTO is in today's world and in the future.
Thank you, Alejandro. And final words to you, John. Please go ahead.
All right. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. Looking at what we have been discussing, what my colleagues have been raising, I echo their points. I wanted to say that Microsoft supports the World Trade Organization and the rule-based system that it manages. What is helpful to business is that the WTO helps drive certainty, which is what businesses need. Having uncertainty is a risk amongst the many other risks that exist in the world today. Uncertainty slows down trade. It also slows down investment domestically and internationally. We look at the WTO's role as one that continues to advance trade globally, to create the trade rules that are so important, especially for smaller countries that are competing against larger ones. rules that are applicable for today and also for the future. What's also very important is the ability to enforce these rules. You know, having rules and not enforcing them doesn't help very much in the long run. The WTO provides tremendous assistance in capacity building and training, trade facilitation, and we encourage, you know, that type of work as well. Just touching on AI is transformative. It will change how trade is conducted. And we look at the WTO as a critical part of the solution change that will be impacting the world. The WTO, in a nutshell, is best positioned to remove trade barriers. And, you know, thanks for the opportunity to cover some topics today and looking forward to greater engagement in the future.
Thanks very much, John. And I would like to hand the floor to Andrew Wilson from the ICC to give some concluding remarks, and then we will wrap up the webinar. Please go ahead, Andrew.
Thank you. I have to say it's a very daunting task to give closing remarks after such a rich panel with genuine experts in their respective fields, but I will do my very best. I want to start by saying a huge thank you, of course, to all of our panelists for making the time to participate in this discussion. Of course, to all of the attendees, both virtually and in person at the WTO, but also particular thanks, Suja, to you and the WTO Market Access Division for the opportunity to partner on this event. Unsurprisingly, given our DNA and our business constituency, we're an organization that believes, I think, fundamentally in the value of business-government dialogue on the development of trade policy to help governments identify key trade trends, emerging solutions, but also to make sure that policies, multilateral, regional, national, actually work with the end users in the real world. And I think nowhere is that more important in many ways than when it comes to the digitalization of trade, and in particular, digitalization of trade processes. We've heard of some of the complexities, the difficulties in connecting the virtual and real worlds. We know that systems change is extremely difficult. We need interoperable systems across many different parts of the global trade landscape. And also, I think we've heard very clearly, particularly with the discussion latterly on AI, that technology is emerging very, very quickly and very fast. So where better to get expertise than from the developers of those new technologies and tools, the private sector. So we see this as absolutely critical. I want to end by just identifying 4 themes that I think we as ICC consider to be particularly important from today's discussion. The first is really the question of what is the price? What is real digitalization of merchandise trade? Sometimes when we speak to stakeholders, we hear the notion almost of simply PDFing paper-based documents and sending them by email. When we speak of trade digitalization or digitalization of trade processes, that's really not what we mean. We're talking about turning documents to data and seamless end-to-end digital processes that can bring real efficiency gains and generate some of the valuable data that John Besic, amongst others, mentioned earlier. So let's really think about end-to-end digitization, real digitization, not simply converting paper documents to PDF. That's something we're heavily invested in working on with industry through our Digital Standards Initiative based out of our Singapore hub, where we're working with businesses and industry associations across the supply chain to look at the adoption of trusted technologies, interoperable systems, and common digital standards for trade documents. That's an important piece of the puzzle, but I really want to emphasize the importance of policy change catalyst and the key role that the WTO can play there. Second theme I think we've heard is clear regional and national differences in terms of the state of digitalization and also the nature of trade digitalization. And I think a key conclusion there is the need for more trade-related capacity building to have a clear digital angle to it. I've heard UNCTAD in the past speak of digital trade capacity building only attracting 1% of aid for trade funding. I don't know if that's true or an overstatement of sorts, but clearly there's more we can do perhaps even using innovative public-private models to accelerate and scale the supply of trade-related capacity building to enable digitalization in customs, but also critically with industry, particularly small businesses. The third thing I want to emphasize is the importance of this agenda from an environmental perspective. And that certainly doesn't just mean removing the millions, if not billions, of pieces of paper circulating the globe each year through the adoption of digital processes, but also the ability to make customs and logistics more efficient and therefore reduce unnecessary emissions, but also to generate data that can really start to measure the sustainability profile of trade. We can't do that without processes. Achieving digitalization at scale is absolutely critical if we want to enhance and measure and verify the sustainability or ESG performance of global trade. And fourth, and I think most importantly, and I think very fitting with the theme of today's discussion, is the importance of collaboration. This is not something industry can do on its own. This is not something that governments can do on their own. We need genuine collaboration, more opportunities like this for dialogue. And I very much hope this event today can be the start of an ongoing discussion between business and the WTO and perhaps other interested parties to really think through how do we work together to take the global trading system from its current mainly analog form to digital, to fully maximize the potential of new technology, to enhance access to global markets, to enhance the ESG profile of global trade, and really to take trade finally into the 21st century. I'll leave my remarks there. My thanks again to you, Suja, and the Market Access Division, to all of our panelists. And as I say, I hope this can be the start of a collaborative and fruitful journey together. Many thanks.
Thanks very much, Andrew, for your very, very nice concluding remarks, nicely summed up. And I just do want to give a sort of a virtual round of applause to our speakers. They've done tremendously well, and also to the audience in the room who have really been very much. And I apologize to the participants in the room because I never gave you an opportunity to ask questions, and I apologize for that. But they've been here and they've been listening to you very, very carefully. So really an applause to all of you, and thank you so much once again, and we shall be in touch. Thank you. And thanks very much, everyone in the room. Thank you.
Thank you.